We're welcoming now Alex Doman to our Autism Hope Summit. We're very happy to have Alex back. Alex was with us last year and was able to educate us a lot on different advances in some of the programs that he's not only worked on, but invented and developed himself. And so Alex is the founder and CEO of Advanced Brain Technologies, co-founder of Sleep Genius, founder and director of the Movement Program, and a best-selling co-author of Healing at the Speed of Sound. And he has written for publications such as Autism Research and Treatment, Autism Science Digest, Sensory Integration Focus Magazine, Autism, Asperger's Digest, and Cutting Edge Therapies for Autism. So clearly there's a connection with the community that we are serving here at the Autism Hope Alliance. So lastly, and not to be overlooked, Alex has been named as one of the top 50 human behavior experts to watch in 2017. So congratulations, Alex. That's quite an achievement.
Thanks, Tom. Appreciate it.
Well, we're so glad you can join us today. We know how busy you are, and so we thank you for taking time out of a long day on a Friday evening to talk with us so that parents can learn more about this subject.
Well, it's a pleasure, and, as we've gotten to know each other over the years, this is a passion project for me and a life's endeavor. So any opportunity we have to touch families, we want to do.
So why don't we get started with regard to advanced brain technologies? Let's begin there. Why did you start ABT?
Well, we'll do the short version since we have limited time today. But I've been very privileged to grow up in a family of pioneers in the field of child and human brain development, starting with my grandfather and great uncle. My grandfather was one of the pioneers of brain injury rehabilitation as a rehabilitation physician, and also he and his colleagues and my father were also some of the first in the field to not look at autism as a back then, at the time that they were looking at it, it was considered childhood schizophrenia, which was a terrible label to be associated, and took a sensory neurodevelopmental holistic approach toward helping children diagnosed on the autism spectrum to achieve optimal performance in their life. So growing up in this work for generations and many decades, I had spent a number of years doing clinical research on sound and music interventions to help individuals increase performance, especially doing a lot of work with kids on the spectrum. And through that process, discovered a need in talking to parents and talking to professionals for safe, effective, home-based intervention that parents could do in conjunction with professional support. And that led me to put together a team and develop something we're very proud of called the Listening Program, which we offer through Advanced Brain Technologies to serve a wide variety of populations, but with very particular application for kids with autism.
And Alex, didn't you talk about the Listening Program last year at the summit?
We did. We did a nice focus on sharing specifically the research and background and the application of the Listening Program for kids on the spectrum.
Excellent. So if any of our listeners want to go back and access that information, it's available obviously to listen to through the Autism Hope Alliance website. There's a link available there. Our focus today has to do more with sleep. And so when did the importance of sleep become apparent to you?
Well, over the course of 25 years of working with kids and working with clinicians, you begin to identify certain patterns. One of those patterns is that often when children are not responding to interventions that you would expect them to, you begin to try to weed out causal factors that may be contributing. And a light bulb moment happened, and that was, if our kids aren't sleeping, the things that we're doing aren't going to work and won't stick. So we began really researching the impact of sleep on the people that we were serving, and it really became kind of the number one thing, the number one problem that we needed to solve. Improving sleep regulation so that the body and the mind is set up for success in any endeavor that we make to help our kids move forward and ourselves. If we're sleep deprived, our function massive.
Absolutely. And whether we're on the spectrum or not, it makes perfect sense. Anybody who's been sleep deprived realizes they simply can't function as well, but it has all kinds of immune consequences and health consequences too. But I wonder, how common are sleep problems for children on the spectrum?
Well, as you've shared, we've all experienced sleepless nights. Sleep problems are very common, and the incidence is increasing. And children with autism, it's reported to be as high as 80% of our kids.
Wow.
And if you're living in a household with a child on the autism spectrum, chances are, if they're sleep deprived, so are you and everyone else living in the house, right?
Yeah. So it's 80% is a huge number. That's far more than I expected. What is the impact? Yeah. What is the impact of that deprivation?
Well, the lack of sleep really does come at a high cost. If we look at the short-term effects of a poor night's sleep, it affects behavior, mood regulation. So we're essentially looking at self-regulation functions, attention, the ability to learn new information and to retain that information. As we look longer term, the impact of sleep deprivation does affect brain development. So it has an adverse effect on neuroplasticity. It does, as you mentioned, suppresses immune system function, but it also long-term can lead to a host of health problems, and this is across the population. Incidents of depression are much higher. Incidents of obesity are much higher. Cognitive decline, Alzheimer's disease, diabetes, and we could just go on with a very, very long list of health impacts. It's a major issue.
Yeah, so clearly it's important. I'm curious about the amount of sleep needed. I've actually read a few references recently with regard to how much sleep is really needed, and it appears that in young children in particular, of course, when our children are first born, they sleep an awful lot. But let's say, from ages 3 to 8, would you agree that, 10 hours of sleep is optimal, or is more needed, less needed? And then, of course, as we age, the consensus seems to be that less sleep is required. Do you have an opinion on that?
I do, right? So the younger the child, the more sleep is required. And you mentioned a 10-hour number is a good mark for ages 3 to 8. Reality is often very different from the ideal. And, everybody requires different amounts of sleep, but people that say that they perform well on 4 or 5 hours of sleep are in denial. And one of the problems when you're sleep deprived distorts your perception of what.
Yeah.
And that good old adage, get 8 hours of sleep per night, is a nice reference point. It's interesting. Stanford University did quite a bit of research. They've got one of the most advanced sleep study centers in the world, and they were doing studies on Stanford athletes and looking at what 10 hours of sleep, a goal of 10 hours of sleep, would do to enhance performance across the athletic disciplines. And just aiming for 10 hours increased sleep duration in these athletes. And even if they weren't achieving 10 hours, if they were getting 8 or 9 or even a little bit less, performance went up measurably, objective across the athletic discipline. So free throw percentages, lap times for swimmers, you name it, everybody had marked increases. So, a target of greater sleep is good, but getting a discipline down and then maintaining it is, generally the challenge for people.
Absolutely. And so what factors then contribute to sleep problems?
Well, it's multifactorial. So if we start with environmental influences, okay, noise in our sleep environment, light in the sleep environment, and temperature are very, very big factors. We want to sleep in a quiet environment. We want to minimize and eliminate light in the environment, and we generally need to sleep in cooler temperatures, but in a comfortable range for each individual, generally below 70 degrees. Now, for children with autism, studies are suggesting problems being compounded with circadian rhythm cycle disturbance and also abnormal melatonin regulation. And, believe most people know that melatonin is the hormone that's critical for sleep regulation. So sensory processing, though, also comes into play. So for our kids that are sensory sensitive, if they're sensitive to sound in the environment, to light and to touch, then the environmental factors are compounded. Some other factors that come in is that our kids on the spectrum can get anxious about bedtime. And also they can have difficulty recognizing the social cues that are indicating that it's time to go to sleep. So these just, touch on, many of the things that are contributors to sleep disturbance.
It surprises me that the ideal temperature is under 70 degrees. I think that would surprise a lot of people. In our household, I do not have a child on the spectrum. My youngest is 17. He's constantly turning the thermostat down, and I'm constantly turning the thermostat up.
The great battle of the thermostat.
Yeah, he would love 70 degrees or below. I can tolerate about 72.
Right.
But that's fascinating. But people sleep better when it's 70 or below. Is that correct?
Yes. So one of the first things that we'll do in a sleep hygiene routine is we begin to essentially take an environmental audit, right? Let's audit sound levels. Let's audit light sources. Let's audit electronics in the sleeping environment. Are we creating a cave and a haven for sleep? And temperature being a big factor. And, what happens is the body begins overheating, if you will, heating up during the sleep cycle, then that can cause wakefulness because of discomfort. So a cooler environment, and then you pile on the blankets, and then that's you can shed or add as needed, but to keep that room environment, say at around 68 degrees, that's really an ideal.
Wow.
And that's where we keep our home, 68.
That's impressive. Now, this time of the year, you probably just I live in Florida, so for me, I'm always fighting the heat and the humidity. But where you live, I saw some snow on the ground, so you just keep the heat at a lower temperature, right?
Well, Tom, interesting. It's spring here in Utah, and a common occurrence that happens is we can have 4 seasons in a single day. And that day was yesterday. It was as high as 66. We had pouring rain, we had snow, we had sleet, and then everything dried up and went back to high temperature.
Boy.
Today's in the mid-60s, so.
Oh, good. That's a nice. Yeah. Well, it's beautiful out there. So when we talk about sleep hygiene, Alex, beyond temperature, have you touched on all the factors when it comes to sleep hygiene?
Well, there's other pieces we need to talk about. So sleep hygiene are those practices that surround our sleep routine, right? So part of sleep hygiene is creating routine, right? So that we do and we know for our kids on the spectrum how important routine is, and we want to not uh, make that maladaptive, but a routine and something predictable is very useful in the sleep routine. So I like to see that sleep routine begin about an hour before sleep. And we begin providing very clear cues and signals that we're transitioning to sleep time. And one of the things that we can do is, turn off electronics, no screen time, ideally 2 hours before bed. But at least an hour before bed, the screens go off. That's one of our first cues. We can begin to play relaxing music in the environment. With our little guy, we've got a 7-year-old son, very clear sleep routine. We transition from screens off to what we call nighttime games. So these are, activities that we do to kind of wind down and spend family time. We begin to play soft music. We drop the light levels. We transition into, bedtime clothing attire and, brushing of teeth. So each of these are steps toward sleep. The nighttime games and nightly reading in the bedroom when our son is in bed, and what we've done, all the things that also are going to support that. So part of sleep hygiene is to limit caffeine intake within several hours before bed, not to have our kids go to bed hungry, but also not have them go to bed stuffed. So there's
Right.
a number of things that we look at, and we kind of take on one at a time. We don't try to do everything all at once, but creating the routine and creating the social cues for a pre-sleep ritual are very important, as are the wake ritual. What happens when our children wake up, and an important part, and I'll just give a tip: set a definite time that's target for lights out, go to sleep, and a definite wake time. And what that does is it begins to entrain the circadian cycle, the body clock, to know when we should go to sleep and when we should wake, and to really try to stay within 30 minutes of that go to bed target and that waking target 7 days a week, ideally.
Excellent. And you mentioned the need to turn off electronics, preferably 2 hours before bed, but at least an hour before bed. Why is that so important?
Well, a lot of research is coming out around the light and the impact of light, and it's important to understand that the way that the brain naturally gets the signal that it's time for sleep is through the eye. The brain has a part, and we'll use a big fancy term. It's called the suprachiasmatic nucleus. And that suprachiasmatic nucleus is the center stage of our body clock that sets our circadian rhythm. And the timing is set off based on light. So as we begin to drop light levels, that is a signal to the brain that it's time to rest. As we're taking in light, that's time to awake and to arouse and start our day. So if we have artificial light sources coming in at night, it messes up our body clock. And the result of that is the sleep hormone melatonin gets depleted. So it begins diminishing because the darkness begins to elevate melatonin production. So when we have too much light, and especially screen time light, that's depleting melatonin by up to 30%. So for our kids that already have melatonin regulation problems, it's a confounding factor.
Yeah.
Particularly.
Now, is that? Yeah. What about adults with these e-readers and iPads and these digital devices? I noticed that a number of them, will dim in low light, and I've even seen some apps that really soften light in low light settings. Are they any better for adults if they prefer to?
They are absolutely better. For example, I'm an iPhone user, and I have my night shift setting on my iPhone. So if I happen to look at my device, which never happens, right? We all practice what we preach
right.
before bed. But it does make a difference because it actually changes the tone of the light out of a blue hue to a golden hue, which does change the brain's response to that input. But the other thing that we have to keep in mind is the content on the device. Is it a stimulus? Is it provoking thought? It's changing arousal levels. It's changing alertness. So often, just even the content of what we're taking in is having an impact.
That makes sense. What about sleep medicine for our children? Where do you stand on that?
I'm not a physician, nor do I play one on the internet or on television. But we have to be very sober about the risks and the dangers with sleeping pills, both prescriptive and over-the-counter. Every year we have 60 million annual U.S. prescriptions for sleep medications. And what we learn, and then you have over-the-counter medications, right? So some people are using NyQuil, for example, and even something like NyQuil or an antihistamine used to help an individual go to sleep has an impact on drowsiness the next day. Other side effects, you can see dizziness, forgetfulness, and clumsiness, constipation, urinary retention, blurred vision, and dry mouth. As we get into the prescription pills, which are classified technically as sedative hypnotics, what they do is they work on the receptors in the brain that slow down the nervous system in general. And some of the risks with one class of these is that you can become physically and emotionally dependent. There's an overall reduction actually in sleep quality, so your deep sleep cycles are shortened, and you get this kind of drowsy hangover effect. In the non-benzodiazepines, there's drug tolerance issues, what you call rebound insomnia, sleepwalking, sleep driving, new or worsening depression symptoms. So the side effects are massive, and we know that prolonged use develops physiological and emotional dependence or addictions. Most studies show that insomniacs are actually better off without sleeping pills. There is earlier death expectancy for those who are taking sleeping pills, and people that use sleeping pills chronically, lifelong effects are as deadly as smoking. And if you just even read the FDA warnings that are on the label of these, the FDA has required that labels specifically are specifying lower dosages because of the known risks of next morning impairment, grogginess, foggy, unclear, hangover effect. This is just scratching the surface. So, I think these are individual decisions. And if we can begin with sleep hygiene practices and, work on gut-brain connection and a functional medical approach through whole foods and supplementation before we go to the pills and other alternatives, and then to work closely with a prescribing physician if they feel that the sleep meds are in order. But this is not an area that parents should be taking on their own. They really
understood.
Support.
And if it is either used, recommended, or prescribed, it would be very short term, because we don't want to become dependent on these things, nor do we want our children, obviously, to become dependent on them. I'm right there with you on the potential negative health impact that these drugs can have, any drug for that matter, but absolutely hear what you're saying and agree. What about what we sleep on? These foam mattresses, I guess there's been some research on off-gassing with these foam mattresses. Is that true?
It is, and I'm glad that this is coming to light. We're surrounded by chemicals every day, and after a while, it gets harder and harder for the endocrine system to rid the bodies of the toxic chemicals. Right, so mattress companies spray mattresses with fire retardants, and some use chemicals that are in the structure of their materials that facilitate certain behaviors. What we actually sleep on rather than a foam mattress in our home is a gel matrix technology. So it's actually made of mineral oil. And this has been approved for a number of medical applications. It's hypoallergenic, it's antimicrobial, and it doesn't off-gas. So on a gel mattress service, the one that we use is IntelliBed, and we love the IntelliBed system because they are very attuned to this toxicity issue and also sensory sensitivities in our kids. So the gel material itself is very comfortable and supportive for kids that have tactile sensitivities. So really encourage staying away from the foam and going toward more of a gel solution.
And that can be a significant investment, I would imagine. Typical household, probably, 3 beds, right? And if you were to convert all of them, that's not inexpensive, to say the least, is it?
No. I mean, changing your mattress is one of the biggest investments that you can make, but then we also have to think about what is the lifetime effect of the sleep surface that we're on. What's the value of our spine and our back over a lifetime? So most you're supposed to replace your mattress every 10 years, but the truth is most of the mattresses that we sleep on need to be replaced far more frequently. So it's and I don't think we think about it until it's totally worn out or completely uncomfortable, or it's
so there's a dip in the middle.
Sloping so much that you roll off of it.
I'm curious. I don't know the answer to this, obviously, but are there any barriers that could be placed on the surface of a mattress that could help with this off-gassing that you're aware of?
Not that I'm aware of, Tom. And if we think about it, it's not just the top of the mattress that's off-gassing.
Right.
And the older the mattress is, the more off-gassing.
Okay. So it's not a simple solution. Maybe by prioritizing, who gets the new mattress first, which is likely our child, especially if they're on the spectrum, and then we can move up from there. That's excellent advice. Now, let's go back to the listening program for just a moment. Obviously, as the creator of that, is there an application here when it comes to sleep issues?
It's a global application, so children, on the spectrum experience, a wide range of difficulties. And, the symptoms and severity of these, range widely. So, with the listening program, which is a method, it's music listening therapy, and it has a global effect on the central and peripheral nervous system. So it's influencing our sensory input channels into the brain, auditory, vestibular, visual, and our motor, our cognitive, our emotional, and arousal systems. So, it's an important tool for stress regulation for our kids, so that's very important because one of the leading factors to sleep dysfunction is stress. And our kids on the spectrum have self-regulation problems most frequently. And with self-regulation problems, that is affecting arousal, and that is impacting attention, stress states. So by using the listening program, we can lower stress states, help support autonomic nervous system function. So by doing that very quickly to help the brain in its regulation of our fight-flight responses to our environment. both the sympathetic and the parasympathetic. And a lot of our kids live in sympathetic overdrive, right? They're stressed,
Right.
they're activated, they're on guard. And what the listening program can do is help put on what we call the parasympathetic brake, and to provide that response of, okay, let me rest and relax and rest and digest. So if we think of it holistically, it's a holistic solution to support everything that we're doing, whether it's behavioral therapy, a neurodevelopmental program, a sensory program, social skills training, or biomedical treatments, and other therapeutic modalities. And what we see and have for almost the 20 years that the listening program's been used is that one of the first things that does change is the sleep pattern. And we see improved sleep quality, and we see improved sleep duration. Even though it's not specifically designed for it, the more global effects that it's having is having kind of this systemic positive impact.
And just out of curiosity, is that part of your evening soft music listening program? Is that an option there?
It's generally not. It's not an episodic benefit. So, a lot of what we do, Tom, is develop music that's used episodically, meaning specific for that effect in that state we want in the moment. And the other programs are brain training, and it's changing the brain structure and the brain function over time. So it's a longer-term effect that's impacting the sleep. So generally, when I do my listening, I do it when I start my day. Now, some families, we'll do a morning and an evening routine. And for some, it's going to help a child go to sleep, but for some, it's going to overstimulate them. So it's very individual. And it depends what phase we are in the program. Certain phases are going to be less stimulating than others, so it does depend what point you are in the program, but just really individual preference and characteristics. Some kids, they put on TLP and they'll fall fast asleep.
Yeah.
Others, they'll be up for 2 hours.
Right.
Saying, let's do stuff.
Yeah. Okay. Well, good advice. And so let's talk a little bit about Sleep Genius. This is a company that you started a few years ago to focus specifically on helping people sleep better. Tell us about that company.
Well, a little bit about Sleep Genius. Because of the big sleep issues that we were seeing in our population, we began to work on something very specific, and what I mean episodic, something that you use that's an auditory sleep aid, non-pharmaceutical sound that's going to be used to help induce and to maintain sleep. And we started by doing very, very specific research in composition and performance of musical pieces that would help induce sleep and help maintain sleep. And as we were producing that music, and a lot of that started with experimentations on relaxation music that we've used that people have found very calming and helping with sleep, and building on that experience and research and modifying our techniques for sleep, that I was introduced through a friend to a neuroscientist. And at the time, he was a professor in neuroscience at Brown, Dr. Seth Horowitz. And when we got together, I had discovered that he had been doing research that was commissioned by NASA. And NASA had commissioned Seth research the impact of the vestibular system on astronauts and their sleep in space. So, this is pretty fascinating. And as we discussed the research, what I discovered is he had developed an acoustic algorithm that was very effective to induce sleep and help maintain sleep. So in a very short time, we came together to commercialize the technology and to take it out of the laboratory and give it to real people that it could help and get it out of the space program. So it's actually a what you call a NASA spin-off technology. So a NASA funds research, and the outcome of that is a commercialized product. It becomes a NASA spin-off technology, and Sleep Genius is one of those. So what we did initially, Tom, is we put together a mobile app. And what this mobile app was to, see, could we use this technology in an app to help people sleep? And essentially it works this way. You have what we call a neurosensory algorithm that gently rocks the brain to sleep by stimulating the vestibular system, creating what we call a sopite response. The sopite response is a motion-induced drowsiness. It's a natural phenomenon that happens in the brain. And parents know this phenomenon because it's why rocking your baby puts them to sleep.
Yeah.
The vestibular system in the brain is triggering this response, which leads to drowsiness. So driving a child in the car, and they fall asleep, or you fall asleep as a passenger in a car or on a train, you suddenly get sleepy, that's the sopite response. So the algorithm in the Sleep Genius music induces that response with sound. And that's blended with some other very calm audio technologies embedded in these beautiful music soundtracks. So through the app, we have kind of a non-clinical approach that's very effective to help people sleep. And then we have a actual clinical grade program that has a deeper effect in the algorithms that are used through our provider network at Advanced Brain Technologies. We're actually using this in the Veterans Administration with the Air Force and the U.S. Army to help both warriors, active duty, and veterans with their sleep issues. So it's used broadly for children as well as adults.
So the clinical program is not a part of the app. Is that correct?
Right. So there's a iOS and Android app simply called Sleep Genius that anybody can access. Then the clinical grade program is available through Advanced Brain Technologies, where you get a deeper effect, where the soundtracks are much higher quality and they're actually provided on a audio player. And then that's delivered through something called sleep phones, which are a sleep-safe headphone. It's a headband with flat speakers inside of it so that we can get a deeper effect of the technology than we can through the app.
Wow. And how long does that music play when you're wearing those headphones on the clinical side?
So if it is if we look at two basic types of sleep disturbance or insomnia, there's onset insomnia and maintenance insomnia. So if you have onset insomnia, it's difficult getting to sleep, then you would use that just for a 45 to 90-minute cycle. And if you also have maintenance insomnia, then you let that play at a very low level through the night. And the brain habituates to that very quickly. It becomes very familiar. So initially it's novel. And the first few nights, people sometimes have adjustment symptoms of being a little stimulated and listening to it and being curious. So what we recommend is you do 30 nights, and you do 30 nights straight, and you teach the brain a new pattern. And generally by that time, we're finding close to 80% effectiveness, which is interesting as we go to the 80% number of kids affected on the spectrum with sleep issues.
Right.
We're at about 80% efficacy on the audio sleep aid with Sleep Genius as well.
So after 30 days, does the protocol change at all?
Depends on the sleep pattern. Some will need to stay with it. And it really is dependent on the sleep hygiene. So it's the holistic picture. We can use the auditory sleep aid through Sleep Genius, but that has to pair with good sleep hygiene, and the good sleep hygiene takes time. So this often for many people becomes a lifestyle habit, like brushing your teeth. You put on the sleep phone, press play, and go to sleep with Sleep Genius, which we do at night at home.
What's great about it is it sounds, correct me if I'm wrong, but it sounds like a one-time investment that you can use indefinitely as often as needed. So it's not like you're buying a bottle of product that you have to renew every month. this is something you purchase. And are there updates from time to time? I'm curious.
There are, so if people are using the app, and the app's only $4.99, so
Okay.
you can't get hurt there. As we have updates, they're released for the application. We're actually in development of a new delivery modality for Sleep Genius. I can't say a lot about it right now, but there are 2 new systems that are coming out in the not so distant future, which we're pretty excited about. So people can check in with us in the future and see as things are evolving. So the same audio technologies, but new delivery methods in terms of how the protocols are provided.
Great. Well, that's exciting. What about success stories? You want to share any?
This is interesting. Last week, we got a note from a mom, and I'm going to try to paraphrase this, but it's in almost 25 years of doing this work, and you hear from parents, and the testimonies, just like we get through AHA, they keep you going. It's what it's all about. And this mom has 2 boys on the spectrum, and the family is in the process of moving from the U.S. to the U.K. and with stops in Australia along the way. And as they're moving, 2 kids on the spectrum, the family's moving across the world. And they're sleeping in strange places. 6 people in 2 beds as they're traveling.
Wow.
And they decide to start using Sleep Genius then. I mean, it couldn't be worse possible conditions.
Yeah.
And the Cliff Notes version is within a few nights, rather than 4 to 5 hours of the kids getting to sleep because they both had onset insomnia, that was cut to 1 hour to 30 minutes. 1 hour or 30 minutes. Then they were sleeping through the night. And their sleep patterns over all of this chaos of traveling around the world and going through a move got both of these kids regulated. So it was 15 to 20 minutes to get to sleep, and they were sleeping through the night despite all of the chaos.
Wow. Now, was this the app?
We were blown away.
I bet. Yeah, it's amazing. What was this, the app or the clinical?
This was the clinical grade. So they had the system that they got through Advanced Brain with the sleep phones, and each boy has their own system that they're using. And just this week, based on kind of the power of that, Mom has decided to also put them on the listening program protocol. And what was great is one of the boys said, I really didn't expect that this would help me. And it really has, so I want to know what else they have that can help me.
That's wonderful. That's a great experience.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. So, by chance, is any of this covered by insurance?
Some. So there is one insurance company that currently provides this. So active duty military families that have TRICARE health coverage that are enrolled in what's called the ECHO program. So this is the extended care healthcare option. They can actually not only have Sleep Genius, but all of our programs fully funded through their benefits program. That's specifically in the TRICARE West region right now, which covers about 2/3 of the United States. But their benefits are fully funding all of the programs and support that goes around them. But generally, this is going to be an out-of-pocket purchase for a family.
And I was going to say, is there a rough estimate? But I would actually encourage families and listeners to the summit to investigate on their own, to determine that.
Absolutely.
What's that, Alex?
No, I agree, and we are seeing spotty coverage with other insurers. This isn't medical equipment, But sometimes, based on the symptoms of the kids, non-medical products can get classified as durable medical equipment in certain conditions with a doctor's prescription. So it for sure is worth investigating. The Sleep Genius program is not an insignificant investment, but it's far less than most things parents are pursuing.
I'm certain of that. Now, you have 6 practical steps that you like to talk about that we can start using right away with regard to sleep. Why don't we cover those?
Well, let's go from the top. The first step is to keep a sleep diary. So in a sleep diary, and you can just get a simple spiral-bound notebook to do this, is to keep track of the time of going to sleep, how often kids are waking at night, and the duration of each waking, so actually logging what those times are. Then to log the wake time each morning and the overall sleep duration, so you're gathering some data. And then over the course of a couple of weeks, you're going to begin to identify patterns and factors that are contributing to problems and can begin monitoring progress. So you begin to play investigator, right? So if certain patterns begin to emerge, well, is there a sound in the environment that's having an impact? And I'm going to give you one example. We had a kid on the spectrum that had very hypersensitive, hyperacute hearing. Sound wasn't uncomfortable to him, but it was hyperacute. And this kid was waking at about 4:15 every morning. And what we discovered through Mom's investigation is there was a neighbor down the block whose garage door opened and closed at that time every day going to work that this kid was picking up. And it was waking him up. So, I mean, sometimes things aren't even under our roof. So the investigator keeping a sleep diary begins to give you some data to work from. 2 is create a routine. So we want to establish a pattern for sleep that's going to help your child recognize the social cues for bedtime. So these include a quiet pre-sleep transition activity, reading, a warm bath, soft lighting in the bedroom, starting to quiet the home down, and setting a regular time to go to bed as well as to wake. So routine. 3rd, we go back to screen time. Let's limit the screen time. That's televisions, that's computers, that's tablets, that's smartphones. 2 hours ideally, but nothing within an hour before bed. Again, the light from these screens suppresses the normal nighttime release of melatonin in the body, which is that hormone that tells our body clock it's night and time to sleep. 4th, we want to create a haven. So we want to think of our own bedrooms and the child's bedroom as a sanctuary for sleep. Playtime and other activities should generally be limited to other rooms in the home so that the signal is my room is a place to sleep. The goal is to create a safe, a calm, a distraction-free environment, which is dark, which is quiet, and a comfortable temperature. The next 2 steps aren't immediate. The first 4 are. 5, do look at the mattress that we're sleeping on and make sure that we have something that gives good pressure relief and isn't toxically off-gassing so that we're giving the body the support that it needs for relaxing sleep. And 6th, we can reset with sound. So the right sounds can actually improve brain rhythms for better sleep, making it easier to go to sleep and to stay asleep. And something like Sleep Genius, calming, relaxing music, a babbling brook or soft water, nature sounds playing. I would not recommend noise machines, however, but resetting with sound can also be very effective. So, with these 6 steps, the first 4 we can start with immediately. The others we can explore, but really, what we want to do is not only help our kids with autism, but each family member to get that vital sleep that they need. We need it for our mental, our physical, and our emotional health.
Excellent. Now, you said you wouldn't recommend sound machines. I have to ask you to elaborate on that.
Well, one of the issues that we get is this thing that we call white noise. Generally speaking, is a tool that people use to filter out distractions in the environment, and we habituate to the sound of the noise machines, and it's one of the most common tools that are used. The challenge is that if we're using actual white noise, which technically is every sound frequency which is audible, which is 20 hertz to 20,000 hertz, played at equal volume, so that this is generated by a sound generator, a synthetic sound that doesn't have a rhythmic, melodic structure to it. It's very unnatural. So while it creates a barrier, what it's also doing is elevating cortisol and jacking up stress in the body, which is the last that our kids need. So white noise is a stress-inducing influence. And while it may screen some background sounds, if people like the concept of noise and they're not using our products, they should at least explore what's called pink noise or brown noise. Pink and brown noise are two elements we use within Sleep Genius in small doses, but those type of noise influences are actually don't get to that harsh stress-inducing stage and provide that screening benefit the white noise does offer.
Excellent. So, well, I'm glad that
what
came
the
up.
research is showing is the white noise is not great.
That's I'm glad, really glad that came up. So, Alex, what are you working on now? Anything that we haven't touched on that's exciting and something we can look forward to?
Oh, there's always exciting things. One thing that we're just introducing is we know how important movement is to the brain and development and our children's learning. So after over 10 years of research in the UK in schools, we've actually developed a evidence-based movement program. Which helps children with their learning and their reading and academic function. So it's actually called the Movement Program. And we're very excited with the outcomes that we're seeing. So that's just becoming available. And on the adult side of things, we're working on solving the stress issue in our population, and are working on some very interesting technology to monitor and lower stress levels in the population. And excited to share, that as it emerges over the next couple of years as the research and the development comes along.
Oh, outstanding. So to find out more about either the listening program or Sleep Genius, where should our listeners go? What's the best resource or resources?
The Advanced Brain Technologies website, which is advancedbrain.com. And information on both programs and our other work is there. There is also a website for Sleep Genius at sleepgenius.com. And parents can go and just go to the App Store, go to Google Play, and experiment with the apps to get started, and then explore the clinical system later if they like.
Very good. Now, is there anything that I might have missed that you want to mention now, or have we covered pretty much all the bases?
Well, I think we've covered the basis for what we can do today.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
Late on a Friday night. Yeah. Well, we appreciate all that you do.
Don't give me another forum. There's much I'd like to talk to, and a lot of topics.
Right.
In terms of serving the families that are in the summit. I guess my only comment would be is for each parent to appreciate the uniqueness and individuality of our kids, and to recognize they have limitless potential. And our jobs as parents is to do anything and everything we can sensibly within our means to help our kids attain it. and having a good network of professionals and family and friends surrounding them. Being a parent, one of the most joyful and one of the most difficult things we do in our life. And to reach out and look for supports where we can. And clearly, the parents listening to this now and involved in the summit are those proactive parents that are working to find the tools and the solutions for their kids so they can optimize their life.
Very well stated. Thank you, Alex. And thank you personally for volunteering your time to work with Autism Hope. We know that you are very involved in one of our new programs. You've been, advising us, and we've been bouncing ideas off of you for a new program we have called the Gift of Hope. So we're very grateful for the time and effort you put into that, the time and effort you put into this, and we thank you for taking a little time away from your family this evening to help educate the parents who are looking for answers. So thank you, Alex, very much.
My absolute pleasure. Thanks, Tom.
You're very welcome.